In Manhattan's Thornton Industries boardroom, a veteran executive faced corporate betrayal. What started as a quarterly meeting took a shocking turn when he encountered ageist discrimination from his own protégé. Arthur Blackwell wasn't your typical corporate veteran. For 30 years, he had mastered bridging traditional wisdom with cutting-edge technology. When Sophia Rivera attacked him with, "You're too old to understand business," he had no idea this moment would liberate him from corporate constraints. Arthur's unexpected laughter would lead to revealing his secret fintech empire. What began as humiliation would become a generational showdown. The corporate world would never be the same. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany table stretched like a battlefield between them, its polished surface reflecting the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Manhattan's financial district 47 floors below. Arthur Blackwell adjusted his reading glasses and studied the quarterly projections displayed on the wall-mounted screen, the numbers telling a story he'd seen before. A company bleeding market share to younger, hungrier competitors who moved at digital speed while Thornton Industries clung to processes that had worked for decades. The boardroom carried the weight of tradition in every detail, from the oil paintings of former CEOs to the heavy leather chairs that had hosted countless strategic decisions. But today, that tradition felt more like an anchor than a foundation. David Thornton sat at the head of the table, his usually confident demeanor betraying cracks of uncertainty as he gestured toward the declining revenue charts. "We're down 12% this quarter," Thornton announced, his voice carrying the controlled tension of a man watching his legacy crumble. "Our client acquisition has stagnated, and retention is suffering because, frankly, our systems feel ancient compared to what the market is offering." Arthur watched the faces around the table, executives ranging from their early 30s to mid-50s, each representing different philosophies about how to navigate the changing landscape. James Wright, the CFO, scribbled notes with mechanical precision, his analytical mind already working through scenarios. Margaret Foster, the senior board member, observed with the sharp attention of someone who had weathered multiple industry transformations. And then there was Sophia Rivera. At 32, she commanded attention in a way that went beyond her VP of Strategy title. Her presentation materials were flawless, her data visualization cutting edge, her confidence radiating the kind of certainty that boards found reassuring in uncertain times. Arthur had mentored her rise through the company, watched her brilliant mind tackle complex problems with an intensity that reminded him of his younger self. But something had shifted in their relationship over the past year. Where there had once been mutual respect, Arthur now sensed a cold calculation in her interactions with him. She spoke to him with the kind of polite dismissal reserved for obstacles to be managed, rather than colleagues to be valued. "The solution is clear," Sophia said, standing to address the room with the kind of commanding presence that naturally drew attention. "We need complete digital transformation, cloud migration, AI integration, blockchain implementation, the full spectrum of modern financial technology. Half measures won't cut it anymore." Her presentation unfolded with impressive scope and undeniable ambition. She proposed gutting legacy systems, rebuilding customer interfaces from scratch, and implementing technologies that would position Thornton Industries as a leader rather than a follower. The timeline was aggressive, 18 months for complete transformation. The budget was substantial but justified by projected revenue increases. Arthur found himself appreciating the boldness of her vision, even as his experience flagged potential problems. He'd lived through the dot-com crash, witnessed companies destroy themselves by chasing innovation without understanding implementation. There was wisdom in measured change, in preserving institutional knowledge while embracing necessary evolution. When Sophia finished her presentation, Thornton opened the floor for discussion. Several executives voiced enthusiasm for the aggressive timeline, their eagerness to appear forward-thinking evident in their quick endorsements. Margaret Foster asked pointed questions about risk mitigation and implementation phases, her decades of experience informing her measured skepticism. Arthur waited until the initial enthusiasm subsided before speaking. He stood slowly, his movements carrying the deliberate pace of someone who had learned that rushing led to mistakes. Sophia's vision is impressive, he began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had served him well in countless boardrooms. But I'd like to suggest a hybrid approach. We shouldn't abandon the systems and processes that have served our clients well for decades. Instead, we could implement a phased integration that preserves our institutional strengths while selectively adopting new technologies where they add genuine value. He outlined his perspective with the kind of detailed understanding that came from decades of seeing trends rise and fall. His approach emphasized careful testing, client feedback loops, and maintaining service quality during transitions. It was thoughtful, strategic, and built on hard-won experience about what worked in practice versus what looked good in presentations. The room listened with polite attention, but Arthur could sense the subtle dismissal in their body language. To them, his measured approach sounded like the caution of someone who didn't understand the urgency of their situation. Sophia's response came with surgical precision. "With respect, Arthur," she said, her tone carrying just enough deference to mask the attack, "that kind of thinking is exactly why we're in this position. Our competitors aren't implementing phased approaches. They're moving at market speed. While we're testing and gathering feedback, they're capturing our clients." She turned to address the full room, her voice gaining strength as she continued. "The financial technology sector doesn't wait for companies that can't keep up. We need leaders who understand that disruption isn't a gradual process. It's sudden, complete, and unforgiving to those who hesitate." Arthur felt the shift in the room's energy, the way conversations could turn from respectful disagreement to something more personal, but he maintained his composure, recognizing that Sophia was fighting for more than just strategy approval. She was positioning herself as the voice of the company's future. "I understand the urgency," Arthur replied, keeping his tone even. "But I've also seen companies destroy themselves by abandoning proven practices in favor of untested solutions. There's value in institutional memory, in understanding why certain processes exist before discarding them." The silence that followed carried weight. Arthur realized that his words, intended as wisdom, were being received as resistance to change. In a room full of executives desperate to prove their relevance to a board questioning their leadership, his caution sounded like fear. Sophia's smile was sharp as she delivered the blow that would define everything that followed. "You're too old to understand business." The words cut through the boardroom's silence like a blade, her voice rising with a passion that transformed her polite disagreement into something far more personal. "The business world has moved beyond your generation's comfort zone. We don't have time to hold hands with people who think success comes from doing things the way they've always been done." The attack landed with brutal efficiency. Every executive in the room felt the sting of her words, whether they identified with Arthur's experience or feared being lumped in with his supposedly outdated thinking. Thornton's face went carefully blank, his political instincts warning him against taking sides in what had suddenly become a generational battleground. Margaret Foster's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, her decades of fighting for respect in male-dominated boardrooms giving her unique insight into the discrimination disguised as business strategy. James Wright's pen stopped moving, his analytical mind recognizing that the conversation had shifted from strategy to something far more dangerous. But Arthur surprised them all. He laughed. Not the bitter laugh of someone wounded, but the genuinely amused chuckle of someone who had just realized something important. The sound carried through the boardroom, disrupting the tension that Sophia's attack had created. "You know what, Sophia?" Arthur said, standing with a fluid motion that suggested decision rather than defeat. "You're absolutely right." The room held its breath, uncertain whether Arthur was conceding or counterattacking. "I am too old," he continued, his voice carrying a lightness that seemed completely at odds with the situation. "Too old to waste any more time in meetings where respect is measured by how quickly you can dismiss experience. Too old to pretend that wisdom is a liability in a business built on understanding human nature and market cycles." He gathered his papers with unhurried precision, his movements suggesting someone who had just been released from an obligation rather than dismissed from relevance. "Too old to care whether this company succeeds or fails based on the decisions you make without the benefit of having lived through similar transformations before." Thornton finally found his voice, recognizing that he was watching a valued executive walk away. "Arthur, let's discuss this privately. There's no need for—" "Actually, David, there is." Arthur's tone remained conversational, but his words carried finality. "Sophia has made the company's position clear. I'm apparently a relic of an outdated approach to business. The wise thing for someone in my position would be to step aside and let the new generation implement their vision without interference from someone too old to understand modern business." He moved toward the door, his pace suggesting someone who had somewhere important to be rather than someone fleeing in defeat. "I wish you all success with your digital transformation," he said, pausing at the door to look back at the room. "Truly. I hope it works exactly as planned." The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow carried more impact than if he had slammed it. In the silence that followed, the executives struggled to process what had just happened. Sophia felt a moment of uncertainty, her victory suddenly feeling less complete than she had expected. She had prepared for Arthur to argue, to defend himself, to make the kind of scene that would justify her attack. His gracious exit left her wondering if she had missed something important. Thornton cleared his throat, his political instincts scrambling to restore order to a meeting that had veered into dangerous territory. "Well, let's table this discussion for now and reconvene tomorrow to finalize our digital transformation strategy." But Arthur was already in the elevator, watching the floors tick by as he descended from the 47th floor towards street level. For the first time in months, he felt something he hadn't experienced in the corporate environment. Freedom. His phone buzzed with a text message. Elena, asking about their scheduled call to discuss accelerating their timeline. Arthur smiled as he typed back a simple response. "Change of plans. We're moving to phase 2. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Arthur stepped out into the Manhattan evening, his mind already shifting from corporate employee to entrepreneur. Behind him, 47 floors above, Sophia Rivera believed she had eliminated a threat to her vision. She had no idea she had just awakened something far more dangerous than an aging executive clinging to outdated methods. She had awakened a competitor who no longer had anything to lose and everything to prove. Arthur's hand trembled slightly as he inserted the key into his Brooklyn apartment door, the adrenaline from the boardroom confrontation still coursing through his veins. The modest two-bedroom space couldn't have been more different from the glass towers of Manhattan: exposed brick walls, hardwood floors worn smooth by decades of use, and furniture that spoke of comfort rather than status. But appearances, as Arthur had learned over 30 years in business, could be profoundly deceiving. He loosened his tie and walked directly to what most visitors assumed was a home office. The room contained a single desk, a comfortable chair, and walls lined with technical books that seemed oddly advanced for someone his colleagues considered technologically challenged. Arthur pressed his palm against what appeared to be a standard wall panel, and the hidden biometric scanner confirmed his identity with a soft beep. The false wall slid aside, revealing a setup that would have impressed the most ambitious Silicon Valley startup. 4 curved monitors dominated the space, displaying real-time blockchain analytics, market data streams, and code repositories that pulsed with activity. The air hummed with the quiet efficiency of high-end servers, their LED indicators casting a blue glow across equipment that represented 2 years of careful investment and meticulous planning. Arthur settled into the ergonomic chair that had supported countless late nights of development work, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the practiced fluency of someone who had never stopped learning. The screens came alive with activity as he logged into Sage Chain's development environment, the platform that represented everything Sophia Rivera believed he was incapable of understanding. "Good evening, Arthur." Elena Vasquez's voice filled the room through high-definition speakers as her image appeared on the central monitor. Even through the video call, her energy was palpable, the kind of brilliant intensity that had made her a standout at Stanford before she made the decision that changed both their lives. Elena. Arthur found himself smiling for the first time since leaving the boardroom. "I hope you're ready for an interesting conversation." "Always, though you look like someone who just survived a corporate firing squad." Her dark eyes studied his face with the perceptive attention that made her such an effective CTO. Let me guess, another board meeting where they treated you like a relic from the pre-digital age? Something like that. Arthur leaned back, the day's events feeling almost surreal in the context of his hidden world. Actually, it was exactly like that. Sophia Rivera made her position quite clear about my relevance to modern business. Elena's expression shifted, her casual demeanor replaced by the focused intensity Arthur had first noticed at that tech conference 18 months ago. She had been the only person under 30 who had approached his presentation about integrating traditional risk assessment with blockchain technology, asking questions that revealed both deep technical knowledge and genuine curiosity about leveraging institutional wisdom. What did she say? Elena's voice carried the edge of someone who had fought her own battles against age and gender discrimination in the tech world. That I'm too old to understand business. Arthur chuckled, the memory already feeling like liberation rather than humiliation. In front of the entire executive team, she positioned herself as the voice of innovation while painting me as an obstacle to progress. And you laughed. It wasn't a question. Elena had worked with Arthur long enough to understand his reactions. I laughed because I realized she was absolutely right, just not in the way she intended. Arthur's fingers moved across his keyboard, bringing up SageChain's latest performance metrics. I am too old to waste time in boardrooms where wisdom is treated as weakness and experience is seen as liability. The screens around him displayed the fruits of their collaboration, a fintech platform that didn't just compete with existing solutions, but fundamentally reimagined how financial transactions could work. Where other blockchain platforms prioritize speed or security, SageChain achieved both by incorporating risk assessment algorithms based on Arthur's decades of understanding market psychology and institutional behavior. Show me where we stand, Arthur said, his voice carrying the authority of someone stepping fully into his role as CEO rather than moonlighting corporate executive. Elena's screen split to display technical dashboards that would have impressed any venture capital firm. Transaction processing is running at 98.7% efficiency, with zero security breaches in our closed beta. Our smart contracts are handling complex financial instruments that other platforms can't touch because they lack the institutional knowledge we've built into the algorithms. Arthur studied the data with the same intensity he had once brought to quarterly reports, but with a satisfaction that corporate metrics had never provided. SageChain wasn't just technically superior, it represented a philosophy that honored both innovation and experience, creating something more powerful than either approach could achieve alone. Client feedback? He asked, pulling up user interface mock-ups that reflected months of careful design work. Exceptional. The beta testers keep saying the same thing. It feels like someone finally built a platform that understands how financial institutions actually work, not just how programmers think they should work. Elena's enthusiasm was infectious, her confidence in their creation evident in every gesture. Arthur remembered the moment he had decided to trust Elena with his vision. The tech conference had been filled with presentations about disrupting traditional finance, but most speakers seemed to view institutional knowledge as something to be discarded rather than evolved. Elena had been different, young enough to push technological boundaries but wise enough to understand that true innovation built upon rather than destroyed proven foundations. I need to tell you something, Arthur said, his decision crystallizing as he spoke. Today wasn't just another corporate humiliation. It was the moment I realized I'm done pretending to be something I'm not. Elena leaned forward, sensing the shift in his tone. I've been trying to balance two identities, the loyal company man and the entrepreneur. But Sophia made it clear that Thornton Industries doesn't value what I bring to the table, so I'm making a choice. Arthur's voice carried the finality of someone who had just burned his last bridge to a world that no longer wanted him. We're accelerating our timeline. I want to be market-ready in 8 weeks instead of 6 months. Elena's eyes widened, her mind immediately calculating the implications. Arthur, that's ambitious even for us. We'd need to finalize our investor presentations, complete security auditing, establish our market entry strategy, and build our client acquisition pipeline. The regulatory compliance alone can be handled. Arthur's interruption carried the confidence of someone who had navigated regulatory environments longer than Elena had been alive. I have relationships that can expedite the process, connections that understand both innovation and institutional requirements. He pulled up financial projections that reflected 2 years of careful planning and conservative estimates. Even accelerated, SageChain's market entry would be methodical and sustainable, built on the kind of strategic thinking that came from experience rather than enthusiasm. "What about Thornton Industries?" Elena asked, her loyalty to Arthur evident in her concern about potential legal complications. "What about them?" Arthur's smile carried an edge that suggested he had already considered every angle. "I developed SageChain on my own time, with my own resources, using knowledge I accumulated over decades of experience. They have no claim on intellectual property they didn't know existed." Elena studied his face, recognizing the transformation taking place. The man she had partnered with had always been brilliant, but corporate constraints had muted his natural leadership instincts. Now she was seeing Arthur Blackwell without limitations, the entrepreneur who had built his first company from nothing, who had survived the dot-com crash, who had learned to synthesize traditional wisdom with technological innovation. "Then let's do it," she said, her decision made. 8 weeks to market launch. "But I want to be clear about something. This isn't just about proving Sophia Rivera wrong. This is about showing the entire financial services industry that the future belongs to platforms that honor both innovation and institutional knowledge." Arthur nodded, feeling the weight and excitement of commitment. Around them, the servers hummed with quiet efficiency, processing algorithms that represented the fusion of his experience with Elena's technical brilliance. SageChain wasn't just a product, it was a philosophy that refused to accept the false choice between tradition and innovation. "There's something else," Arthur said, his voice carrying a note Elena hadn't heard before. "I want to reach out to my son, Michael. It's time he understood what his old-fashioned father has really been working on." Elena's smile reflected understanding that went beyond their business partnership. She had heard enough about Arthur's family dynamics to know that his relationship with Michael carried the weight of generational misunderstanding and missed opportunities for connection. "The bridge builder generation," she said, referencing conversations they had shared about the unique position of people like Michael, young enough to understand technological innovation, but experienced enough to appreciate institutional wisdom. Arthur's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Heard about the board meeting. Coffee tomorrow? M. Foster." Margaret Foster, the one board member who had remained silent during Sophia's attack, but whose eyes had conveyed both understanding and something that might have been approval. He showed the message to Elena, who raised an eyebrow. "The plot thickens. Think she knows about SageChain?" Margaret Foster didn't become one of the most respected board members in financial services by missing important details, Arthur replied. "But whether she knows specifics or just recognizes opportunity, this could be interesting." As Elena signed off with promises to begin accelerating their development timeline, Arthur remained in his hidden office, surrounded by the technology that represented his true capabilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the pure excitement of building something meaningful without corporate constraints or political considerations. The screens continued their quiet work, processing transactions and refining algorithms, while Arthur planned the next phase of a journey that would prove age was an asset rather than liability, experience was innovation's greatest ally, and sometimes the most dangerous competitors were the ones everyone underestimated. Arthur's fingers drummed against the starched white tablecloth as he watched his son navigate through the crowded restaurant, Michael's confident stride carrying the unmistakable bearing of someone who belonged in Manhattan's financial district. Maria's seafood-focused menu and panoramic views of Central Park made it the kind of place where deals were discussed over wine pairings, where the younger generation of finance professionals gathered to network and strategize. Michael slid into the booth across from his father, his tailored suit and carefully styled hair projecting the image of a rising star at Henderson & Associates, one of Thornton Industries' primary competitors. At 24, he possessed the kind of sharp intelligence that Arthur recognized from his own reflection 30 years earlier, but tempered with an MBA's analytical framework and a digital native's intuitive understanding of technological systems. "Dad," Michael's greeting carried the stilted formality that had characterized their relationship since his mother had moved to California following the divorce. "Thanks for dinner, though I have to say, your timing is interesting." Arthur raised an eyebrow, signaling the waiter for wine while studying his son's expression. Interesting how word travels fast in our industry. Michael's voice carried a mixture of embarrassment and defensive loyalty that suggested he had already heard versions of the boardroom incident. Jennifer Martinez from Goldman mentioned that there was some kind of situation at Thornton Industries today. Something about generational conflicts and leadership strategy. The wine arrived, a 2018 Barolo that Arthur had selected for its balance of tradition and innovation, though he doubted Michael would appreciate the metaphor. He poured carefully, using the ritual to gather his thoughts about how much to reveal and how quickly to shift their conversation from damage control to opportunity. "Your friend Jennifer has good sources," Arthur said, his tone neutral. "Though I suspect her version of events might lack important context." Michael shifted uncomfortably, his loyalty to his father warring with his professional reputation. "She said Sophia Rivera publicly questioned your understanding of modern business practices. That you left the meeting abruptly." He paused, clearly struggling with how to address the elephant in the room. "Dad, I know the industry has been changing rapidly, and maybe some of the newer approaches seem what, Michael?" Arthur's interruption was gentle but pointed. "Foreign to someone my age? Too complex for someone who built his career before smartphones existed?" The question hung between them, exposing years of unspoken assumptions and missed communications. Michael had grown up watching his father work long hours in what seemed like an increasingly outdated corporate environment, never understanding the strategic thinking that guided Arthur's decisions, or the depth of knowledge that informed his seemingly conservative approaches. "I didn't mean it like that," Michael said, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely certain what he had meant. "It's just, the business world is moving so fast now. Blockchain, artificial intelligence, quantum computing applications, and financial modeling. Sometimes it feels like everything we learned even 5 years ago is obsolete." Arthur sipped his wine, recognizing his son's struggle with the same generational assumptions that had driven Sophia's attack. But where Sophia's dismissal had been calculated and cruel, Michael's uncertainty came from genuine confusion about how to bridge the gap between his father's experience and his own technological fluency. "Tell me about your work at Henderson," Arthur said, deliberately shifting the conversation toward Michael's expertise. "What kind of projects are you handling?" Michael's posture straightened as he moved into familiar territory. "Mostly fintech integration analysis. We're evaluating blockchain platforms for institutional clients who want to modernize their transaction processing without compromising security or regulatory compliance." His enthusiasm became evident as he continued. "The challenge is finding solutions that can handle enterprise-level complexity while maintaining the efficiency advantages that make blockchain attractive in the first place." Arthur nodded thoughtfully, filing away details that confirmed his assessment of market conditions and competitive landscape. "Sounds like you're dealing with the classic innovation dilemma: how to embrace new technology without discarding institutional knowledge that took decades to develop." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Exactly. Michael leaned forward, animated by the rare moment of professional connection with his father. "Most platforms are built by programmers who understand the technology, but don't really grasp how financial institutions actually operate. They create elegant solutions for problems that don't exist, while missing the real pain points that enterprise clients face." "And what would you say are those real pain points?" Arthur asked, genuinely curious about his son's perspective while also gathering intelligence about how the market perceived existing solutions. Michael considered the question carefully, his analytical training evident in his systematic response. "Security remains paramount, but it has to be security that doesn't create operational bottlenecks. Regulatory compliance can't be an afterthought. It needs to be built into the architecture from the beginning. And perhaps most importantly, any new system has to integrate seamlessly with existing institutional processes, rather than requiring complete operational overhaul." Arthur smiled, recognizing his own strategic thinking reflected in his son's analysis. Those are remarkably sophisticated insights for someone who supposedly represents the move fast and break things generation. Dad, that's a Silicon Valley stereotype that doesn't really apply to financial services, Michael replied, then paused as he registered something in his father's tone. Why do I feel like you're testing me about something? Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card. Simple, elegant design with raised lettering that read, Sage Chain Financial Technologies, and Arthur Blackwell, CEO. He placed it on the table between them, watching his son's expression shift from confusion to intense curiosity. Michael picked up the card, studying it with the same attention he would give a complex financial model. Sage Chain, I've heard rumors about this platform. Henderson's research team has been trying to get information about it for months. He looked up at his father, pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in ways he hadn't expected. You're the mystery CEO that everyone's been speculating about? For the past 2 years, Arthur confirmed, watching his son process the implications. While Sophia Rivera was positioning herself as the voice of innovation at Thornton Industries, I was actually building the kind of platform you just described, one that honors institutional knowledge while leveraging cutting-edge technology. Michael's wine glass paused halfway to his lips. 2 years? Dad, this whole time I thought you were… He trailed off, clearly struggling to reconcile his assumptions about his father's technological capabilities with the evidence in front of him. Thought I was what? A dinosaur clinging to outdated business practices? Someone who didn't understand that the world had moved beyond my comprehension? Arthur's tone carried amusement rather than resentment. I suspect I'm not the only one who's been underestimated. Show me, Michael said, his professional curiosity overriding personal dynamics. I want to understand what you've built. Arthur pulled out his phone and navigated to Sage Chain's secure demonstration portal, handing the device to his son. This is our beta interface. Take a look at the architecture and tell me what you think. Michael's eyes widened as he scrolled through technical specifications that exceeded anything he had evaluated at Henderson. The platform seamlessly integrated blockchain security with traditional risk assessment algorithms, creating transaction processing capabilities that addressed every pain point he had identified, while maintaining the kind of institutional sophistication that enterprise clients demanded. This is incredible, he said, his voice carrying genuine admiration. Dad, this isn't just competitive with existing platforms, it's genuinely revolutionary. The risk assessment integration alone would save our clients millions in compliance costs. Arthur felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. For the first time in years, his son was looking at him with respect rather than polite concern for his relevance in a changing world. There's something else you should know, Arthur said, making a decision that would fundamentally alter their relationship. Today's confrontation with Sophia wasn't a defeat. It was liberation. I'm accelerating Sage Chain's market launch. 8 weeks from now, we'll be competing directly with every platform Henderson is currently evaluating. Michael sat back, clearly recalibrating everything he thought he knew about his father's position in the industry. And you're telling me this because you understand both worlds, traditional institutional knowledge and technological innovation. Because you're young enough to see possibilities I might miss and experienced enough to appreciate why certain practices exist. Arthur paused, then added quietly, and because I'd like my son to be part of what comes next, if he's interested. The offer hung between them, representing more than just professional opportunity. It was an invitation to bridge the generational gap that had defined their relationship, to build something together that honored both Arthur's experience and Michael's fresh perspective. Michael looked down at the business card, then back at his father. Tell me more about Sage Chain. Everything. I want to understand what we're really talking about. Arthur smiled, recognizing the beginning of a partnership he had hoped for but never expected. Outside the restaurant windows, Manhattan's lights sparkled with promise, and for the first time in months, the future felt full of possibility rather than limitation. The boardroom felt different the morning after Arthur's departure, as if the absence of his steady presence had shifted the room's gravitational center. Sophia Rivera arrived early, her usual confidence tempered by an unexpected hollowness that accompanied what should have been complete victory. The mahogany table reflected the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, but the atmosphere carried an undercurrent of unease that she couldn't quite identify. David Thornton sat at the head of the table, his usually immaculate appearance showing subtle signs of strain, a slightly loosened tie, fingers drumming against his leather portfolio, eyes that had the unfocused quality of someone who had spent the night second-guessing decisions. The CEO position required political navigation, but yesterday's confrontation had exposed fault lines he hadn't anticipated. Margaret Foster entered with her characteristic, purposeful stride, her silver hair pulled back in a style that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her eyes. At 62, she had survived multiple industry transformations, broken through glass ceilings that had seemed impenetrable, and developed an instinct for recognizing when corporate dynamics had shifted into dangerous territory. She took her seat across from Sophia with the deliberate precision of someone preparing for battle. James Wright appeared precisely on time, his analytical mind evident in the organized stack of financial projections and market analysis reports he placed on the table. The CFO's relationship with corporate politics was purely tactical. He cared about numbers, trends, and data-driven decision-making. But the previous day's events had triggered concerns that went beyond personality conflicts into territory that could affect actual business performance. Before we discuss strategy implementation, Margaret began without preamble, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned her position through decades of competence, rather than political maneuvering. I think we need to address what happened yesterday. Sophia straightened in her chair, her defensive instincts activating despite her apparent victory. Margaret, I understand that the conversation became heated, but Arthur's resistance to necessary change was becoming a real obstacle to— Stop. Margaret's interruption was sharp enough to cut through Sophia's prepared justification. What happened yesterday wasn't a strategic disagreement. It was a textbook example of age discrimination disguised as business necessity. The words hung in the air with uncomfortable weight. Thornton shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation but uncertain how to redirect it without appearing to condone what had occurred. Arthur Blackwell has 30 years of experience in financial services, Margaret continued, her tone growing colder with each word. He's successfully navigated multiple market crashes, regulatory changes, and technological transitions. His approach to digital transformation emphasized measured implementation and risk mitigation, exactly the kind of institutional wisdom that prevents companies from destroying themselves chasing trends. Sophia felt heat rising in her cheeks, but her voice remained controlled. Margaret, I respect Arthur's experience, but the market doesn't care about our comfort zones. Our competitors are moving at digital speed while we debate implementation timelines. Sometimes leadership requires making difficult decisions about who can adapt and who can't. Leadership, Margaret's voice carried decades of hard-won authority, requires understanding the difference between strategic necessity and personal insecurity. What I witnessed yesterday looked far more like someone eliminating perceived threats to their own position than someone making decisions based on company interests. James Wright cleared his throat, his analytical nature providing a path away from personal confrontation toward data-driven discussion. Speaking of company interests, I've been reviewing our digital transformation projections against current market conditions. The numbers are concerning. He distributed copies of his analysis, the financial modeling reflecting months of careful evaluation. The charts and graphs told a story that complicated Sophia's aggressive timeline and budget projections. Our proposed 18-month complete overhaul carries significant implementation risks, James continued, his voice maintaining the neutral tone he used for delivering unwelcome but necessary information. Based on comparable industry transformations, we're looking at a 67% probability of cost overruns exceeding 50% of budget, and a 43% chance of implementation delays that could disrupt core business operations. Sophia studied the numbers, her confidence wavering as she recognized the thoroughness of James's analysis. These projections assume we approach transformation the same way other companies have. He left because we created an environment where experience was treated as liability and wisdom was dismissed as fear. Sophia felt the conversation shifting away from her control, her position as the voice of innovation suddenly feeling precarious. Margaret, I understand the security breach is concerning, but we can't let one setback derail necessary progress. Arthur's approach would have us moving at a pace that guarantees our competitors will gain insurmountable advantages. What competitors, specifically? James asked, his analytical mind focusing on measurable, rather than theoretical threats. Our market analysis shows that most of our direct competitors are struggling with similar transformation challenges. The companies that are succeeding are taking exactly the kind of measured, integrated approach Arthur recommended. He displayed comparative data showing how their primary competitors were handling digital transformation. The most successful implementations combine new technology with existing institutional knowledge, preserving operational stability while selectively adopting innovations that provided clear competitive advantages. In fact, James continued, there are rumors about a new platform entering the market that supposedly achieves exactly this balance. Something called SageChain, that's been generating significant interest among institutional clients looking for transformation solutions that don't require abandoning proven practices. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of SageChain, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. Interesting timing for a new competitor to emerge. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Their rushed transformation had failed, their measured approach had been dismissed, and now mysterious competitors were potentially entering their market with solutions that addressed the exact problems they were struggling to solve. Sophia realized that her victory over Arthur was beginning to feel increasingly hollow. She had positioned herself as the leader who could guide Thornton Industries into the digital future, but the early results suggested she had led them into exactly the kind of implementation disaster that experienced voices had warned about. So what do we do now? Thornton asked, his voice carrying the uncertainty of someone who had lost confidence in his strategic direction. Margaret stood, gathering her materials with the purposeful motion of someone who had reached a decision. First, we acknowledge that yesterday's events were unacceptable from both a professional and ethical standpoint. Second, we develop a digital transformation strategy that honors both innovation and institutional knowledge. And third, we consider whether it's possible to repair the damage we've done to our relationship with someone whose expertise we clearly need. She paused at the door, turning back to address the room with the kind of authority that came from decades of making difficult decisions. Arthur Blackwell didn't become irrelevant yesterday. We made ourselves irrelevant to him. The question now is whether we're smart enough to recognize the difference, and humble enough to do something about it. The door closed behind her with a finality that left the remaining executives sitting in uncomfortable silence. Sophia stared at the security breach reports, understanding that her position as the company's transformation leader had just become significantly more precarious. The strategy she had championed was failing, the approach she had dismissed was proving correct, and the person she had eliminated was beginning to look like the solution rather than the problem. Outside the 47th floor windows, Manhattan's financial district continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the corporate drama playing out in one boardroom. But inside Thornton Industries, the certainties that had seemed so clear 24 hours earlier were dissolving into questions that no one was quite sure how to answer. And somewhere in Brooklyn, Arthur Blackwell was probably working on exactly the kind of solution they desperately needed, completely free from the constraints of corporate politics, and increasingly motivated to prove that experience, properly applied, could outmaneuver youth and ambition every single time. The morning fog rolled off the Hudson River as Arthur walked through Brooklyn Bridge Park, his breath visible in the crisp October air. Margaret Foster sat on a bench overlooking the water, her posture reflecting the kind of composed authority that had served her well through decades of corporate battles. She wore a charcoal wool coat and carried a leather briefcase that spoke of quality rather than ostentation, the understated markers of someone who had earned her position through competence rather than politics. Arthur approached with the measured pace of someone who understood that this conversation could fundamentally alter the trajectory of everything he had been building. Margaret's invitation for coffee had been deliberately vague, but her timing suggested she understood more about his situation than their brief boardroom interaction had revealed. "Beautiful morning," Margaret said as Arthur settled beside her on the bench, her voice carrying the kind of neutral warmth that preceded important negotiations. "It is." though I suspect you didn't invite me here to discuss the weather. Arthur studied her profile, recognizing the sharp intelligence that had made her one of the most respected board members in financial services. Margaret smiled, the expression carrying genuine warmth mixed with professional calculation. No, I didn't. I wanted to talk about what happened yesterday, and more importantly, what happens next. Arthur remained silent, understanding that Margaret was building towards something significant, and that interrupting would disrupt her carefully planned approach. I've been on corporate boards for 23 years, she continued, her gaze fixed on the morning commuters streaming across the Brooklyn Bridge. I've witnessed more workplace discrimination than I care to remember. Most of it subtle, some of it blatant, all of it damaging to both individuals and organizations. She turned to face Arthur directly, her expression serious. What Sophia Rivera did yesterday was among the most unprofessional displays I've encountered. Age discrimination disguised as strategic necessity, personal insecurity masquerading as business judgment. Arthur nodded, appreciating both her directness and her willingness to name what others had preferred to ignore. I assume you didn't risk corporate political complications just to offer sympathy. You assume correctly. Margaret opened her briefcase and withdrew a tablet, her movements suggesting someone who had prepared thoroughly for this conversation. I've been researching Sage Chain Financial Technologies. Arthur felt his pulse quicken slightly, though he maintained his composed exterior. Margaret's ability to uncover his connection to Sage Chain suggested both sophisticated intelligence gathering and serious interest in what he was building. Impressive work, by the way, she continued, displaying technical specifications and market analysis that revealed the depth of her investigation. A fintech platform that integrates blockchain technology with traditional risk assessment methodologies, developed by a team that combines institutional experience with cutting-edge technical expertise. Exactly the kind of innovation that honors both progress and wisdom. Arthur studied the information on her screen, recognizing that Margaret had accessed details about Sage Chain that weren't publicly available. You've done your homework. I've built my career on thorough preparation and recognizing opportunity when it presents itself. Margaret's tone shifted slightly, carrying the kind of authority that preceded significant propositions. Arthur, what you've created represents everything Thornton Industries needs but doesn't know how to build. A solution that embraces technological advancement without abandoning institutional knowledge. She pulled up financial projections that demonstrated Sage Chain's market potential, analysis that reflected both technical understanding and strategic business insight. Your platform addresses every pain point that traditional financial institutions face with digital transformation, security without operational bottlenecks, innovation without regulatory complications, efficiency without sacrificing the kind of institutional sophistication that enterprise clients require. Arthur realized that Margaret wasn't just offering support, she was positioning herself as a potential strategic partner. What exactly are you proposing, Margaret? I'm proposing that Sage Chain needs more than just technical excellence to succeed in the financial services market. You need strategic partnerships, regulatory navigation, and access to the kind of institutional clients who can provide the scale necessary for significant market impact. Margaret's smile carried the confidence of someone who understood her own value. I'm proposing that I can provide those connections. She outlined her network with the systematic precision of someone who had spent decades building strategic relationships, board positions at 3 major financial institutions, advisory roles with regulatory bodies, consulting arrangements with investment firms seeking digital transformation solutions. More importantly, she continued, I can provide credibility with exactly the kind of institutional clients who might be skeptical of a startup, regardless of its technical merits. When I endorse a platform, boards listen. Arthur found himself impressed by both her strategic thinking and her willingness to risk her reputation on his venture. And what would you want in return? Equity position commensurate with the value I bring, board seat with meaningful strategic input, and the satisfaction of proving that experience and innovation can work together rather than in opposition. Margaret's directness was refreshing after years of corporate doublespeak. Also the personal satisfaction of watching Sophia Rivera realize that dismissing institutional wisdom was the worst strategic mistake of her career. While Arthur and Margaret negotiated the terms of their potential partnership, Elena Vasquez was conducting her own crucial meeting 3 miles away in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the East River. The venture capital firm of Chen & Associates specialized in fintech investments, and their managing partner, David Chen, had the kind of analytical intensity that made entrepreneurs both hopeful and nervous. "The technical architecture is impressive," Chen said, scrolling through SageChain's development documentation on his laptop. "Your integration of traditional risk assessment with blockchain processing addresses fundamental limitations that have prevented enterprise adoption of existing platforms." Elena leaned forward, her enthusiasm for the technical aspects of their platform evident in her animated gestures. "What sets us apart isn't just the technology, it's the philosophy behind the design. Most blockchain platforms are built by programmers who understand technology but not institutional finance. We built SageChain with deep understanding of how financial institutions actually operate." Chen nodded thoughtfully, his experience evaluating fintech startups evident in his systematic approach to assessment. "Your beta testing results suggest significant market demand. Transaction processing efficiency, security metrics, user satisfaction scores, all exceptional. But I have questions about scalability and competitive positioning." "Ask away," Elena replied, her confidence in SageChain's capabilities evident in her willingness to address challenging questions. "How do you plan to compete with established platforms that have significant market penetration and venture capital backing?" Chen's question went to the heart of SageChain's market entry strategy. Elena's smile suggested she had been hoping for exactly this question. Established platforms are struggling with the same fundamental limitation. They prioritize either security or efficiency, innovation or stability, technical sophistication or institutional compatibility. SageChain doesn't make those trade-offs because our architecture was designed by people who understand that enterprise clients need all of those capabilities simultaneously. She displayed comparative analysis that demonstrated SageChain's advantages over existing solutions, data that reflected months of careful market research and competitive evaluation. "More importantly, we're entering the market at exactly the moment when institutional clients are becoming frustrated with platforms that promised easy transformation but delivered implementation headaches. Our timing isn't just good, it's perfect." Chen studied the market analysis, his venture capital experience evident in his systematic evaluation of risk and opportunity. Funding requirements: $8 million for market launch, platform scaling, and business development. Enough to establish market presence without requiring the kind of massive investment that would dilute founding equity or compromise strategic independence. Elena's financial projections reflected both ambitious growth targets and conservative risk management, the kind of balance that suggested serious business planning rather than startup enthusiasm. "I need to discuss this with my partners," Chen said, "but I'm impressed by both the technical excellence and strategic thinking. SageChain addresses real market needs with genuine innovation rather than just chasing trends." Meanwhile, across town at Henderson & Associates, Michael Blackwell was conducting his own form of intelligence gathering. His position as a financial analyst provided access to market research and competitive analysis that could prove invaluable to SageChain's strategic planning. "Any updates on the mysterious SageChain platform?" asked Jennifer Martinez, his colleague whose Goldman Sachs connections provided useful industry intelligence. Michael maintained a carefully neutral expression while reviewing market reports on his computer. "Still investigating. Though I'm hearing that several institutional clients are extremely interested in beta testing opportunities. Interesting timing, considering Thornton Industries' digital transformation problems," Jennifer observed. "Their security breach yesterday has made a lot of people nervous about rushed implementation timelines." Michael filed away that information while accessing Henderson's proprietary database of fintech platforms and competitive analysis. The data he was gathering would provide SageChain with crucial intelligence about market conditions, competitor weaknesses, and client priorities. His phone buzzed with a text from Arthur. "Family dinner Sunday? Would like to discuss some business opportunities that might interest you." Michael smiled as he typed back, "Absolutely. Looking forward to learning more about those opportunities." For the first time in years, he was genuinely excited about the prospect of working with his father, understanding that Arthur had created something that bridged the generational divide between institutional experience and technological innovation. As the day progressed, Arthur found himself in the unusual position of building a team that honored both experience and innovation, combining Margaret's institutional credibility with Elena's technical brilliance and Michael's generational bridge-building capabilities. By evening, as Arthur returned to his Brooklyn apartment, he felt the satisfaction of someone who had spent the day building rather than defending, creating rather than justifying. SageChain was no longer just a platform. It was becoming a movement that proved experience and innovation could work together to create something more powerful than either approach could achieve alone. The emergency board meeting convened at 7 in the morning, the unusual timing reflecting the severity of Thornton Industries' escalating crisis. Sophia Rivera sat across from a conference table that had become a tribunal, her previously immaculate confidence replaced by the careful composure of someone fighting for professional survival. The security breach had metastasized overnight from a technical problem into a full-scale corporate emergency that threatened to unravel everything she had worked to build. David Thornton's face carried the pallor of someone who had spent the night fielding calls from angry clients, concerned investors, and regulatory officials demanding explanations for data exposure that could have been prevented with proper security protocols. The CEO position required political dexterity, but the current situation demanded accountability that couldn't be deflected through corporate spin. Status report, Margaret Foster said without preamble, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been elected by the board to lead the crisis response. The silver-haired executive had arrived with a briefcase full of documentation and the grim efficiency of someone who understood that their company's reputation hung in the balance. James Wright distributed copies of his overnight analysis, the financial projections painted in stark terms that reflected the potential cost of their accelerated transformation strategy. Direct costs from the security breach are approaching $200,000 in forensic investigation and system restoration. But that's minimal compared to potential regulatory fines and client retention impact. He highlighted sections of his report that detailed the expanding scope of their problems. We've had to notify 47 clients about potential data exposure. 12 have already indicated they're reviewing their contracts with us. The State Financial Regulatory Commission has opened a formal investigation into our security protocols. Sophia studied the numbers with growing dread, understanding that each line item represented a failure of the strategy she had championed as the future of the company. These are worst-case projections, James. Most clients understand that security challenges are inevitable during major system transitions. Are they? Margaret's question carried the sharp edge of someone who had witnessed too many corporate disasters that began with exactly that kind of rationalization. Because the clients I've spoken with are saying this breach could have been prevented with proper testing timelines and security validation, exactly what Arthur recommended. The mention of Arthur's name fell across the room like a weight, reminding everyone present that their dismissed colleague had predicted precisely the problems they now faced. Thornton shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly struggling with the implications of having eliminated the one person who had understood their risks. The board is asking difficult questions, Margaret continued, her tone professional but pointed. They want to understand how a VP of strategy could implement a transformation plan that ignored fundamental security protocols and risk assessment procedures. Before Sophia could respond, her phone buzzed with another crisis alert. The expression on her face as she read the message told everyone in the room that their situation had just deteriorated further. Additional security vulnerabilities discovered in the client portal system, she announced, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. The penetration testing firm we hired found 17 separate breach points that weren't identified in our initial security assessment. James immediately pulled up his laptop, accessing real-time system monitoring that confirmed the scope of their expanding problems. This is what happens when you compress security validation timelines to meet arbitrary deadlines. Every shortcut we took to accelerate implementation is now creating additional vulnerabilities. Thornton leaned forward, his political instincts recognizing that they needed solutions rather than recriminations. How long to address these security issues? Complete security audit and remediation. Minimum 6 weeks, assuming we can avoid additional discoveries during the process, Sophia admitted. the words feeling like professional suicide as she spoke them. And that's only if we suspend all other transformation activities to focus exclusively on security. Margaret's smile was grim as she recognized the irony. So your 18-month aggressive transformation timeline has now become a 6-week emergency repair project, followed by complete strategic reassessment. Exactly the kind of implementation disaster that measured approaches are designed to prevent. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Sophia's strategy hadn't just failed. It had actively damaged the company's position and created exactly the kind of competitive vulnerability that her aggressive timeline was supposed to prevent. "There's something else," James said, his voice carrying the reluctance of someone delivering bad news that could get worse. "I've been monitoring industry intelligence, and there are increasing rumors about new competitors entering our market space. Specifically, platforms that claim to offer digital transformation solutions without the implementation risks we're experiencing." He displayed market analysis that showed growing institutional interest in fintech platforms that emphasized security and gradual integration over rapid transformation. SageChain Financial Technologies has been generating significant buzz among exactly the kind of enterprise clients we're struggling to retain. Margaret maintained her carefully neutral expression, though she was acutely aware that SageChain's market timing was becoming devastatingly effective. Arthur's platform was entering the market just as their failures were demonstrating the value of his measured approach. "What do we know about SageChain?" Thornton asked, his competitive instincts activating despite their internal crisis. "Very little, which is unusual for a platform generating this level of institutional interest," James replied. "They seem to have emerged fully formed, rather than going through typical startup development phases. Professional presentations, sophisticated technology, enterprise-level security protocols, all suggesting significant experience and resources." Sophia felt a growing sense of dread as she listened to descriptions of exactly the kind of platform she had dismissed as impossible to build without sacrificing innovation for stability. "Any information about their leadership team?" "That's the most interesting part," James said, pulling up what limited public information was available. The company was founded by someone with extensive institutional finance experience, partnered with a CTO who has impressive technical credentials. But they've maintained remarkable privacy about specific identities and backgrounds. Margaret recognized the strategic value of Arthur's decision to maintain anonymity while building market interest. SageChain was becoming known for its capabilities rather than personalities, creating exactly the kind of institutional credibility that startup founders often struggled to achieve. "The timing is suspicious," Sophia said, her analytical mind beginning to connect pieces that she didn't want to acknowledge. "A mysterious platform with institutional expertise entering the market just as we're struggling with implementation problems? Someone with inside knowledge of our weaknesses could have designed SageChain specifically to exploit our vulnerabilities." Thornton's expression shifted as uncomfortable possibilities began to occur to him. "You think this could be connected to our recent personnel changes?" Margaret stood, gathering her materials with the purposeful motion of someone who had reached a decision about how to proceed. "I think we need to focus on fixing our own problems rather than speculating about competitors. Our security crisis, client retention issues, and implementation failures are entirely self-created." She paused at the door, turning back to address the room with the kind of authority that came from decades of managing corporate crises. "However, I will say this. If someone with institutional knowledge wanted to demonstrate the flaws in our approach, they couldn't have designed a more effective object lesson than watching us create exactly the problems that experienced voices warned us about." The door closed behind her with finality that left the remaining executives sitting in uncomfortable silence. Sophia stared at the security reports scattered across the conference table, understanding that her position as the company's transformation leader was becoming increasingly untenable. Outside the 47th floor windows, Manhattan's financial district continued its relentless pace. But inside Thornton Industries, the certainties that had seemed so clear a week earlier were dissolving into questions that threatened the company's future and Sophia's career. And somewhere in the market, Sage Chain Financial Technologies was preparing to demonstrate that experience and innovation, properly combined, could outmaneuver youth and ambition every single time. The grand ballroom of the Mandarin Oriental overlooked Central Park, with panoramic views that spoke of prestige and established success. Arthur Blackwell stood at the podium, adjusting his microphone while scanning an audience that represented the pinnacle of financial services leadership: CEOs of major banks, regulatory officials, venture capital partners, and institutional investors whose decisions shaped entire market sectors. The timing had been deliberate. While Thornton Industries conducted their emergency board meeting 40 blocks south, Arthur was preparing to demonstrate exactly what they had dismissed as impossible. The invitation-only presentation had generated remarkable interest, with attendance including executives from companies that had struggled with their own digital transformation challenges. Elena Vasquez sat in the front row, her laptop connected to the presentation system that would showcase 2 years of meticulous development work. Beside her, Margaret Foster maintained her carefully neutral expression while internally marveling at Arthur's strategic timing. David Chen from the venture capital firm occupied a prominent seat, his presence signaling serious investment interest to everyone in attendance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur began, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades earning the right to address this audience. "I want to talk about a fundamental misconception that has plagued our industry's approach to digital transformation." He clicked to his first slide, displaying side-by-side images of traditional bank architecture and modern server farms. "We've been told that innovation requires abandoning institutional knowledge, that embracing technology means discarding decades of hard-won understanding about risk, compliance, and client relationships." Arthur's presentation style reflected his corporate experience: measured, authoritative, building toward conclusions, rather than overwhelming with information. This false choice has led to transformation projects that prioritize speed over security, innovation over stability, technological sophistication over practical implementation. He gestured toward Elena, who stood to address the technical aspects of their platform. "My colleague Elena Vasquez will demonstrate why that choice is unnecessary, why the right approach can honor both innovation and institutional wisdom." Elena's presentation unfolded with the kind of technical precision that impressed enterprise audiences. Sage Chain's architecture appeared on multiple screens, displaying blockchain processing capabilities that seamlessly integrated with traditional risk assessment algorithms. Existing platforms typically excel at either security or efficiency, but struggle to deliver both simultaneously, Elena explained, her enthusiasm for the technology evident in her animated gestures. Sage Chain was designed by people who understand that enterprise clients need comprehensive solutions, not technological trade-offs. She demonstrated transaction processing speeds that exceeded existing platforms while maintaining security protocols that satisfied the most stringent institutional requirements. The live demonstration showed real-time processing of complex financial instruments, regulatory compliance verification, and risk assessment that happened transparently without creating operational bottlenecks. Arthur watched the audience's reaction, recognizing the shift from polite attention to genuine interest as Elena revealed capabilities that addressed every pain point they had experienced with existing transformation solutions. "The key insight," Arthur said, resuming control of the presentation, "is that institutional knowledge isn't an obstacle to innovation, it's innovation's most valuable asset. Sage Chain doesn't just process transactions, it understands them in the context of decades of market experience." He displayed case studies from their beta testing program, showing implementation results that delivered everything promised by aggressive transformation strategies without the associated risks and complications. Client satisfaction metrics, security performance, operational efficiency improvements, all exceeding industry benchmarks. Margaret Foster studied the faces around her, recognizing the kind of serious attention that preceded significant business decisions. These weren't startup enthusiasts impressed by technological novelty. They were experienced executives evaluating solutions to real problems. "Questions?" Arthur asked, opening the floor to an audience that had been increasingly engaged throughout the presentation. Sarah Williams, CEO of Continental Trust, raised her hand first. "Arthur, your platform addresses every implementation challenge we've encountered with existing transformation solutions. How did you achieve this level of institutional understanding while maintaining technological innovation?" Arthur's smile carried the satisfaction of someone who had been hoping for exactly that question. By refusing to accept that experience and innovation are mutually exclusive, SageChain was built by a team that combines 30 years of institutional finance expertise with cutting-edge technical capabilities. We understand both the problems and the solutions because we've lived through multiple transformation cycles. Robert Chen, no relation to the venture capitalist who served as CTO at Metropolitan Financial, asked the next question. Can you speak to regulatory compliance? Most blockchain platforms struggle with the documentation and audit trails that regulatory bodies require. Elena fielded this question, displaying SageChain's compliance architecture with evident pride. Regulatory compliance was built into our foundation rather than added as an afterthought. Every transaction creates comprehensive audit trails, our security protocols exceed current regulatory requirements, and our documentation systems are designed specifically for regulatory review. The questions continued for 30 minutes, each answer revealing additional capabilities that demonstrated SageChain's comprehensive approach to enterprise fintech. Arthur and Elena responded with the kind of detailed knowledge that came from actually understanding institutional requirements rather than theorizing about them. As the formal presentation concluded, Arthur made the announcement that would fundamentally alter the competitive landscape. SageChain Financial Technologies will begin accepting enterprise clients in 6 weeks. Our platform is ready for full market deployment, with security protocols validated by independent testing, regulatory compliance verified by third-party auditing, and implementation procedures proven through extensive beta testing. The audience's reaction was immediate and substantial. Multiple executives approached the stage, business cards exchanged, preliminary discussions initiated about implementation timelines and partnership opportunities. Margaret Foster watched the networking with satisfaction, understanding that Arthur had just achieved something remarkable: instant market credibility based on demonstrated competence rather than aggressive marketing or venture capital backing. Meanwhile, 40 blocks south at Thornton Industries, David Thornton's assistant rushed into the emergency board meeting with an expression that suggested their crisis had just developed new complications. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, handing him a tablet displaying live updates from Arthur's presentation. "There's a fintech platform launching that's generating significant industry attention. The presentation is being live-streamed, and several of our clients are in attendance." Thornton studied the tablet with growing dismay, recognizing the sophisticated presentation style and institutional credibility that characterized Arthur's approach to everything he undertook. SageChain Financial Technologies. He read aloud, the name finally connecting to previous market intelligence reports. Sophia's face went pale as she processed the implications. "When is this happening?" "Right now," the assistant replied. "And according to the attendee list, Continental Trust, Metropolitan Financial, and Riverside Capital are all represented. 3 of our largest clients who have been questioning our transformation approach." James Wright immediately pulled up his laptop, accessing real-time financial news feeds that were beginning to report on Arthur's presentation. "This is catastrophic timing. We're dealing with security breaches and implementation failures, while a competitor is demonstrating exactly the kind of stable, secure transformation that our clients want." Margaret Foster maintained her neutral expression while internally appreciating Arthur's strategic brilliance. SageChain's market entry was occurring at the precise moment when Thornton Industries' failures had created maximum receptivity for alternative solutions. "We need more information about SageChain's leadership," Thornton said, his political instincts recognizing that they needed to understand their competition before developing response strategies. Sophia's phone buzzed with a priority alert from one of her industry contacts. As she read the message, her expression shifted from concerned to devastated. "What is it?" Thornton asked, recognizing the look of someone who had just received career-altering news. "Industry intelligence about SageChain's founder," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Arthur Blackwell, CEO and co-founder of SageChain Financial Technologies." The conference room fell silent, as the implications crashed over them like a wave. Their dismissed, outdated executive hadn't just left the company. He had been building exactly the solution they desperately needed while they struggled with implementation disasters that his experience could have prevented. Margaret Foster stood, gathering her materials with the deliberate motion of someone whose strategic planning had just proven remarkably prescient. I believe this concludes our emergency session. We clearly have more fundamental issues to address than security breaches and implementation timelines. She paused at the door, turning back to address the stunned executives. Arthur Blackwell didn't become irrelevant yesterday. We made ourselves irrelevant to him. The question now is whether we're capable of learning from that mistake before our competitors finish what we started. As Margaret left the boardroom, Sophia sat staring at the tablet displaying Arthur's presentation, understanding that her attack on his relevance had just been proven catastrophically wrong in the most public way possible. And 6 miles north in the Mandarin Oriental, Arthur Blackwell was accepting congratulations from an industry that had just recognized him as exactly what Sophia Rivera had claimed he could never be. A visionary leader who understood that the future belonged to those who could honor both innovation and institutional wisdom. The revolution had begun, and experience was winning. Arthur's Brooklyn apartment felt different. At 9 o'clock that evening, the space transformed from a modest refuge into the command center of a financial services revolution. The hidden technologies setup hummed with activity as news feeds tracked the industry response to SageChain's public debut. Investment inquiries flooded Elena's inbox, and preliminary partnership discussions filled Arthur's calendar for the following weeks. He had just finished reviewing client acquisition projections when his doorbell rang with the insistent urgency of someone who needed immediate attention. Arthur glanced at his security monitor, recognizing David Thornton's familiar silhouette despite the CEO's uncharacteristically disheveled appearance. Arthur opened the door to find Thornton accompanied by an unexpected figure. Sophia Rivera stood slightly behind him, her usual commanding presence replaced by something that looked remarkably like contrition. Both executives appeared to have come directly from the office, their formal attire and strained expressions suggesting a long day of crisis management and difficult decisions. "Arthur," Thornton began, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone who understood he was negotiating from a position of weakness. "We need to talk." Arthur stepped aside, gesturing them into his modest living space. The contrast between his apartment's understated comfort and the corporate luxury they were accustomed to served as a subtle reminder that the power dynamics had fundamentally shifted since their last encounter. "Impressive presentation today," Thornton continued, settling onto Arthur's sofa with the careful posture of someone who recognized he was no longer in familiar territory. "SageChain addresses every challenge we've been struggling with. The industry response has been remarkable." Arthur poured coffee from his kitchen, using the domestic ritual to maintain control of the conversation's pace and tone. "Thank you, though I suspect you didn't come here to offer congratulations." Sophia spoke for the first time since entering, her voice carrying none of its previous authority. "Arthur, I owe you an apology. What I said yesterday was unprofessional, unfair, and completely wrong about your capabilities and value to the industry." The words came with obvious difficulty, each admission costing her something significant. Arthur recognized genuine remorse mixed with professional desperation, the combination that occurred when someone realized their strategic miscalculations had career-ending consequences. "Apology accepted," Arthur replied simply, his tone neutral but not hostile. "Though I suspect there's more to this conversation than personal accountability." Thornton leaned forward, his CEO instincts recognizing the opening he needed. "Arthur, Thornton Industries needs what you've built. Our transformation initiative has failed spectacularly, our clients are questioning our competence, and our board is demanding leadership changes that could affect everyone's future." He outlined their crisis with the systematic precision of someone who had spent the day calculating the financial and reputational cost of their mistakes. Security breaches, client defections, regulatory scrutiny, competitive disadvantage. Each problem reflecting the kind of implementation disaster that Arthur's measured approach was designed to prevent. "I'm offering you the position of Chief Innovation Officer with complete authority over our digital transformation strategy," Thornton continued. "Full budget control, direct board reporting, equity compensation that reflects the value you would bring to solving our problems." Arthur sipped his coffee, studying both executives with the calm attention of someone who held all the strategic advantages. "And what would that mean for SageChain?" "We understand that SageChain represents significant intellectual property and market opportunity," Thornton replied, clearly having anticipated this question. We would be interested in exploring acquisition opportunities that preserve your vision while providing the corporate resources necessary for large-scale market penetration. Before Arthur could respond, his doorbell rang again. Margaret Foster appeared on his security monitor, her timing suggesting coordination rather than coincidence. Arthur admitted her, recognizing that the evening's negotiations had just become significantly more complex. Margaret entered with the composed authority of someone who represented board-level interests rather than executive desperation. She nodded to Thornton and Sophia with professional courtesy before addressing Arthur directly. "I apologize for the intrusion, but the board asked me to ensure that any discussions about Arthur's future include appropriate institutional representation." Her tone carried the subtle authority of someone who had been empowered to make decisions rather than just relay messages. Sophia shifted uncomfortably, understanding that Margaret's presence indicated board-level concern about her leadership that went beyond the immediate crisis. "Margaret, I didn't realize the board was involved in these discussions." The board became involved the moment our company's reputation and competitive position were threatened by leadership decisions that ignored both professional expertise and basic business judgment, Margaret replied, her words carrying the weight of formal censure. Arthur recognized the political dynamics at play, understanding that Margaret's arrival had transformed personal negotiations into institutional accountability. "What exactly is the board's position?" Margaret settled into Arthur's remaining chair with the deliberate precision of someone delivering carefully considered decisions. "The board has concluded that yesterday's events represented a fundamental failure of leadership and professional judgment. Effective immediately, oversight of all digital transformation initiatives has been transferred to board-level supervision." She turned to address Sophia directly, her tone professional but final. "Your position as VP of Strategy has been restructured to focus on implementation support rather than strategic leadership. The board has determined that strategic decision-making requires more experienced guidance." Sophia's face went pale as she processed the implications. Her rapid rise through corporate ranks was being reversed just as quickly, her authority eliminated by the same aggressive ambition that had driven her attack on Arthur. "However," Margaret continued, turning back to Arthur, "the board is primarily interested in solutions rather than recriminations. We understand that Sage Chain represents exactly the kind of strategic thinking and institutional knowledge that our company needs." Arthur found himself in the unusual position of holding leverage over executives who had dismissed him less than 48 hours earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him, but his response reflected strategic thinking rather than personal satisfaction. "I appreciate the board's recognition," Arthur said carefully, "but Sage Chain has already attracted significant investment interest and partnership opportunities. Why would I abandon a successful independent venture to return to the corporate environment that just demonstrated its fundamental misunderstanding of both innovation and institutional knowledge?" Thornton's desperation became more apparent as he realized that traditional corporate incentives might not be sufficient to solve their crisis. What would it take? Complete autonomy, unlimited budget, equity participation that reflects the value you would create? Before Arthur could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Chen & Associates confirmed $8 million Series A funding. Terms are excellent. We can maintain complete independence and strategic control." Arthur showed the message to Margaret, recognizing that transparency about his alternatives would strengthen his negotiating position. "As you can see, Sage Chain has options that don't require corporate constraints or political complications." Margaret studied the message with the calculating attention of someone who understood that they were losing a critical negotiation. "What if we proposed a strategic partnership rather than acquisition? Thornton Industries as Sage Chain's first enterprise client, with implementation success serving as a case study for broader market penetration?" Arthur found himself intrigued by the possibility, not because he needed Thornton Industries, but because successfully transforming his former company would provide the kind of validation that no amount of venture capital could purchase. "Tell me more about what partnership would look like," he said, his tone suggesting genuine interest rather than polite deflection. Margaret outlined a structure that would preserve Sage Chain's independence while providing Thornton Industries with access to the platform and expertise they desperately needed. Implementation would be public, documented, and serve as proof of concept for other enterprise clients considering digital transformation. "Sophia would report to you during the transformation process," Margaret added, watching the former VP's reaction to this reversal of their previous power dynamic. She has technical competence that could be valuable if properly supervised and directed. Sophia's expression reflected the humbling experience of having her career trajectory completely reversed, but also something that might have been relief at the prospect of learning from someone whose expertise she had foolishly dismissed. Arthur stood, walking to his window that overlooked the Brooklyn Bridge and Manhattan's financial district beyond. The lights of the corporate towers reminded him of the world he had left behind and the new world he was building. "I'll consider the partnership proposal," he said finally, turning back to face the three executives who represented different aspects of his professional past and potential future. But any collaboration would need to be structured to honor both innovation and institutional knowledge, with clear authority and mutual respect replacing the kind of toxic dynamics that created this crisis. Margaret smiled, recognizing that Arthur was negotiating rather than rejecting their proposal. "I believe that arrangement would serve everyone's interests, and more importantly, it would serve our clients' interests." As the executives prepared to leave, Arthur realized that the evening had transformed from corporate desperation into genuine opportunity for something unprecedented, a partnership that could demonstrate how experience and innovation could work together rather than in opposition. The choice between revenge and redemption would define not just his own future, but the future of an entire approach to business leadership that honored both wisdom and progress. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sage Chain's new Manhattan offices, a gleaming space on the 32nd floor that represented the physical manifestation of Arthur's vision made real. 3 weeks had passed since the evening confrontation in his Brooklyn apartment, and the intervening time had transformed theoretical partnerships into concrete reality that was reshaping both companies and the broader financial services landscape. Arthur stood before a wall-mounted display showing real-time metrics from the Thornton Industries transformation, transaction processing speeds, security compliance scores, client satisfaction ratings, and implementation milestones that told the story of a partnership succeeding beyond anyone's initial projections. The integration had become a case study in how institutional wisdom and technological innovation could work together rather than in opposition. Elena Vasquez approached with a tablet containing the morning's client acquisition reports, her expression reflecting the satisfied intensity of someone watching their technical vision gain widespread validation. "We've received implementation requests from 17 new enterprise clients this week. The Thornton partnership is generating exactly the kind of institutional credibility we hoped for." Arthur reviewed the client list, recognizing names that represented the pinnacle of financial services, major banks, investment firms, and regulatory bodies that had traditionally been skeptical of fintech startups, but were now eager to implement Sage Chain's platform based on documented success rather than speculative promises. "More importantly," Elena continued, "the clients are specifically requesting the partnership model we developed with Thornton. They want transformation that honors their institutional knowledge while delivering technological advancement." The partnership structure had evolved into something unprecedented in the financial services sector. Rather than the typical acquisition or vendor relationship, Sage Chain and Thornton Industries had created a collaborative framework that preserved independence while sharing expertise, resources, and strategic thinking. Michael Blackwell entered the office carrying architectural plans for Sage Chain's expansion into additional floors of their building, his role as Director of Strategic Development having evolved into something far more significant than either he or Arthur had initially envisioned. The young man's business school training, combined with his generational perspective, had made him an invaluable bridge between Sage Chain's institutional approach and the expectations of younger clients. "The space planning is complete for our client services division," Michael announced, spreading the blueprints across Arthur's conference table. "We'll be able to handle implementation support for up to 50 enterprise clients simultaneously, while maintaining the kind of personalized attention that distinguishes us from standard platform providers." Arthur studied the plans with the satisfaction of someone who had learned to balance ambitious growth with sustainable operations. The expansion reflected careful strategic thinking rather than startup enthusiasm, measured scaling that preserved Sage Chain's core values while building capabilities necessary for market leadership. "How's the integration proceeding at Thornton?" Arthur asked, though he already knew the answer from daily progress reports and increasingly positive feedback from clients who had watched their transformation with initial skepticism. "Remarkably well," Michael replied, his tone reflecting genuine admiration for what they had accomplished. "Sophia's team has adapted to the new implementation methodology faster than anyone expected. She's actually become quite effective once she understood that wisdom and innovation work better together than in competition." The transformation of Sophia Rivera had been one of the partnership's most unexpected success stories. Her technical competence, once channeled through insecurity and aggressive ambition, had evolved into genuine collaborative leadership under Arthur's mentorship and Margaret Foster's oversight. The experience had humbled her enough to learn, while challenging her enough to grow. Margaret Foster arrived for their scheduled strategy session, her appearance reflecting the satisfied confidence of someone who had successfully navigated a complex corporate crisis, while positioning her company for long-term success. The board member's strategic thinking had been instrumental in structuring the partnership to benefit both organizations while serving as a model for industry transformation. "The board meeting yesterday was remarkable," Margaret announced, settling into the conference room with evident satisfaction. "Client retention has stabilized, new business development is exceeding projections, and our regulatory relationship has actually improved due to Sage Chain's compliance architecture." She displayed quarterly results that showed Thornton Industries not just recovering from their crisis, but achieving performance metrics that exceeded their pre-transformation baseline. "More importantly, we're being cited by industry analysts as an example of successful digital transformation that preserves institutional strengths while embracing technological advancement." Arthur nodded, understanding that their success was creating ripple effects throughout the financial services sector. Other companies were beginning to question the wisdom of aggressive transformation strategies that discarded institutional knowledge in favor of technological novelty. "There's something else," Margaret continued, her tone suggesting significant news. "The Federal Financial Regulatory Commission has approached us about developing industry standards for fintech integration that could serve as best practices for the entire sector." Elena looked up from her technical reports with obvious excitement. "They want to use our partnership as a model for how established financial institutions can embrace innovation without compromising security or regulatory compliance?" "Exactly. The Commission recognizes that most transformation failures stem from the false choice between tradition and innovation. Our collaboration demonstrates that the most effective approach honors both institutional wisdom and technological advancement." Arthur felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond business success. The partnership had proven something important about the value of experience in an industry obsessed with youth and disruption. They had created a new model for how companies could evolve without abandoning the knowledge that made them valuable in the first place. David Thornton appeared in the doorway, his demeanor reflecting the relieved confidence of someone who had successfully navigated a crisis that could have destroyed his career and his company. The CEO's relationship with Arthur had evolved from corporate politics to genuine mutual respect based on demonstrated competence and shared commitment to institutional excellence. "Arthur, I wanted to deliver this news personally," Thornton said, carrying documents that suggested significant announcements. "The board has approved our proposal to establish the Institutional Innovation Center, a joint research initiative between Thornton Industries and Sage Chain that will focus on developing best practices for financial services transformation." He outlined the center's mission with obvious enthusiasm, a think tank that would study how traditional financial wisdom could guide, rather than constrain technological innovation, creating frameworks that other companies could adapt to their own transformation challenges. The center will be funded equally by both organizations, with research focused on practical applications rather than theoretical speculation, Thornton continued. "We want to prove that the most sustainable innovations build upon rather than replace institutional knowledge." Arthur recognized the strategic value of the center beyond its immediate mission. It would position both Sage Chain and Thornton Industries as thought leaders in an industry that was beginning to question the wisdom of disruptive transformation approaches that ignored decades of hard-won institutional understanding. "There's one more thing," Thornton added, his tone suggesting something particularly significant. "The board wants to offer you a permanent advisory position that would formalize your role in guiding our strategic direction while preserving your independence with SageChain." Arthur considered the offer carefully, understanding that it represented recognition not just of his technical expertise, but of his fundamental approach to business leadership. The position would cement the partnership while creating a model for how experienced executives could contribute to innovation rather than being displaced by it. "I accept," Arthur said, with the understanding that the advisory role serves the broader mission of demonstrating how institutional wisdom and innovation can work together. Elena smiled, recognizing that Arthur's decision reflected the same collaborative philosophy that had driven SageChain's development from the beginning. This partnership is becoming something bigger than either company could have achieved independently. Michael looked up from the expansion plans, his expression reflecting the generational bridge building that had become central to their success. "We're creating a new model for business leadership that values both experience and innovation, wisdom and technological advancement." As the meeting concluded and the various executives prepared to return to their respective responsibilities, Arthur remained in the conference room, looking out at Manhattan's financial district with a perspective that had been fundamentally transformed over the past month. The buildings below represented an industry in transition, struggling to balance innovation with institutional knowledge, youth with experience, disruption with stability. SageChain's partnership with Thornton Industries had proven that these weren't opposing forces, but complementary aspects of sustainable business success. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophia Rivera. "Quarterly transformation review complete, all metrics exceeding targets. Thank you for showing me that leadership means building up rather than tearing down." Arthur smiled, understanding that the message represented more than professional success. It reflected personal growth that had transformed a potentially destructive conflict into an opportunity for learning and collaboration. The afternoon brought a steady stream of client meetings, partnership discussions, and strategic planning sessions that filled SageChain's offices with the energy of a company that had found its market fit and was scaling responsibly to meet demand. Elena spent her time with technical teams that were adapting SageChain's platform for implementation across different types of financial institutions, each requiring customization that honored their unique institutional cultures while delivering standardized technological capabilities. Michael worked with business development teams that were fielding inquiries from companies around the world, all seeking to replicate the success of the Thornton partnership while adapting the model to their own institutional requirements and market conditions. Margaret divided her time between Thornton Industries' board responsibilities and advisory work for other companies that wanted to understand how the partnership model could be applied to their own transformation challenges. As evening approached, Arthur found himself back in his Brooklyn apartment, the space that had served as SageChain's original headquarters and remained his refuge from the intensity of rapid growth and industry attention. The hidden technology setup still hummed with activity, but now it was supplemented by additional monitors displaying real-time data from dozens of client implementations, partnership metrics, and industry analysis that showed their approach gaining widespread adoption. Arthur poured himself a glass of wine and settled into his comfortable chair, reflecting on a journey that had begun with corporate humiliation and evolved into industry transformation. The path from that morning boardroom confrontation to this evening's satisfaction had required choices between revenge and redemption, destruction and construction, proving himself right and proving that collaboration could work. He had chosen redemption, construction, and collaboration. The results spoke for themselves in metrics that mattered, not just financial success, but the creation of a new model for how businesses could honor both their institutional wisdom and their innovative potential. Outside his windows, Brooklyn Bridge connected Manhattan's financial district to the residential neighborhoods where real people lived and worked, serving as a metaphor for the bridges SageChain had built between tradition and innovation, experience and youth, institutional knowledge, and technological advancement. The revolution had succeeded not by destroying what came before, but by proving that the future belonged to those who could synthesize the best of both worlds. Experience hadn't been defeated by innovation. It had been revealed as innovation's most valuable partner. Arthur smiled as he reviewed the day's accomplishments, understanding that he had created something more significant than a successful business. He had proven that wisdom, properly applied, could shape the future rather than be displaced by it. The transformation was complete, but the journey was just beginning. 6 months after the partnership announcement, Arthur Blackwell stood at the podium of the Jacob Javits Convention Center, facing an audience of 3,000 financial services professionals who had gathered for the inaugural Institutional Innovation Summit. The massive conference hall buzzed with an energy that reflected fundamental shifts occurring throughout the industry, a recognition that the future belonged to organizations that could honor both their institutional wisdom and their technological potential. The summit had emerged organically from the success of the Sage Chain-Thornton partnership, as companies across the financial services sector sought to understand and replicate their collaborative approach to digital transformation. What had begun as a single partnership had evolved into a movement that was reshaping how the industry approached change, growth, and leadership. Arthur adjusted his microphone and surveyed the audience, recognizing faces from major banks, investment firms, regulatory bodies, and fintech startups that represented every segment of the financial services ecosystem. The diversity of the audience reflected something unprecedented: traditional institutions and innovative companies coming together to learn from each other rather than competing for dominance. 6 months ago, Arthur began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had served him well throughout his career. I was told that I was too old to understand modern business, that my experience was a liability in an industry that demanded rapid innovation and technological transformation. A ripple of recognition moved through the audience. The story of Arthur's boardroom humiliation and subsequent success had become legendary in financial services circles, but hearing it directly from him carried additional weight and authenticity. What I've learned since then is that the person who said those words wasn't wrong about everything. I was indeed too old to accept false choices between experience and innovation, too old to believe that wisdom and technology couldn't work together, too old to tolerate environments where respect was measured by how quickly you could dismiss institutional knowledge. Arthur clicked to his first slide, displaying comparative metrics that showed the performance of companies that had embraced collaborative transformation approaches versus those that had pursued disruptive strategies. The data told a compelling story of sustainable success versus spectacular failures. The financial services industry has spent the past decade struggling with a fundamental misconception that innovation requires destruction, that embracing the future means abandoning the past, that technological advancement demands sacrificing institutional wisdom. He gestured toward a section of the audience, where Elena Vasquez sat with her expanded technical team, their presence representing the synthesis of cutting-edge innovation with practical implementation expertise. But what we've discovered through our partnership model is that the most powerful innovations build upon, rather than replace, institutional knowledge. Elena stood to address the technical aspects of their approach, her presentation displaying Sage Chain's architecture with obvious pride and satisfaction. The platform's evolution over 6 months had been remarkable, not just in technical sophistication, but in its ability to adapt to different institutional cultures while maintaining core capabilities. When we designed Sage Chain, Elena explained, her enthusiasm evident in her animated gestures, we started with a simple premise that technology should enhance human expertise rather than replace it. Every algorithm incorporates decades of institutional knowledge about risk assessment, market dynamics, and client relationships. She demonstrated the platform's latest capabilities, showing how machine learning enhanced rather than supplanted human judgment, how automation streamlined rather than eliminated personal relationships, how innovation strengthened rather than weakened institutional foundations. Arthur resumed control of the presentation, displaying case studies from the dozens of companies that had implemented collaborative transformation strategies based on the partnership model. The results speak for themselves. Organizations that honor both innovation and institutional wisdom consistently outperform those that choose one approach over the other. The case studies were comprehensive and compelling. Banks that had integrated Sage Chain's platform while preserving their institutional cultures showed improved client satisfaction, enhanced security compliance, and increased operational efficiency. Investment firms that had embraced collaborative transformation reported better risk management, stronger client relationships, and more sustainable growth. But this success isn't just about technology or even business strategy, Arthur continued, his tone shifting to address the deeper implications of their approach. It's about a fundamental philosophy of leadership that values wisdom alongside innovation, experience alongside enthusiasm, institutional knowledge alongside technological capability. In the third row, Margaret Foster sat with a group of board members from various financial institutions, their presence reflecting the industry-wide recognition that governance structures needed to evolve to support collaborative rather than disruptive approaches to change. Margaret had become a prominent advocate for what she termed institutional innovation, transformation strategies that preserved organizational strengths while embracing necessary evolution. Her consulting work with other companies had helped establish best practices for board oversight of technology initiatives that required both strategic vision and implementation expertise. Arthur clicked to a slide showing organizational charts that illustrated how companies were restructuring to support collaborative leadership models. Traditional corporate hierarchies often create artificial barriers between experience and innovation, institutional knowledge and technological expertise. The most successful transformations we've observed involve organizational structures that promote rather than prevent this collaboration. Michael Blackwell appeared on the stage, his role having evolved from Director of Strategic Development to something more significant, a voice for generational bridge building in an industry that had often been divided by age-based assumptions and prejudices. One of the most important insights we've gained, Michael said, addressing the audience with the confidence of someone who had found his professional calling, is that generational differences are assets rather than obstacles when properly leveraged. Younger professionals bring technological fluency and fresh perspectives, while experienced leaders provide institutional knowledge and strategic wisdom. He outlined the mentorship programs, cross-generational project teams, and collaborative leadership structures that had emerged from their partnership model. These initiatives were being replicated across the industry as companies recognized the value of combining rather than choosing between different generational approaches to business challenges. The goal isn't to eliminate generational differences but to channel them into collaborative advantage, Michael continued. The most innovative solutions emerge when technological possibility meets institutional understanding, when fresh thinking is guided by experienced judgment. Arthur returned to the podium for the presentation's conclusion, recognizing that the audience was ready for the announcement that would formalize their movement into a sustainable industry initiative. Today I'm pleased to announce the formation of the Institutional Innovation Institute, Arthur said, displaying the Institute's mission statement and organizational structure. A collaborative research and education organization dedicated to developing, testing, and disseminating best practices for transformation that honors both innovation and institutional wisdom. The Institute represented the culmination of 6 months of planning and partnership development. Funded jointly by participating companies and supported by regulatory bodies, it would serve as a center for research, education, and advocacy for collaborative approaches to industry transformation. The Institute will focus on 3 core areas, Arthur continued, outlining the organization's strategic priorities. Research into collaborative transformation methodologies, education programs for leaders seeking to bridge generational and technological divides, and advocacy for regulatory frameworks that support rather than hinder institutional innovation. Elena rejoined him on stage to describe the Institute's technical research agenda, including studies of optimal integration strategies, security protocols for collaborative platforms, and assessment frameworks for measuring transformation success that went beyond simple efficiency metrics. Margaret Foster spoke about the governance and oversight initiatives that would help boards understand their role in supporting, rather than constraining, collaborative innovation, providing frameworks for strategic decision-making that valued both prudent risk management and necessary technological advancement. Michael addressed the educational components, including leadership development programs, mentorship initiatives, and cross-generational collaboration training that would prepare the next generation of financial services leaders to value both innovation and institutional knowledge. As the formal presentation concluded, Arthur opened the floor for questions from an audience that had been increasingly engaged throughout the morning. The queries reflected genuine interest in practical implementation rather than theoretical speculation, suggesting that the collaborative transformation model had moved from experimental concept to accepted best practice. Dr. Williams from Boston Financial, the first questioner, introduced herself. How do you maintain innovation momentum while preserving institutional culture? Doesn't honoring tradition inevitably slow technological advancement? Arthur smiled, recognizing a question that went to the heart of the false choice their approach was designed to eliminate. The premise of your question assumes that tradition and innovation are opposing forces. Our experience suggests the opposite, that the most sustainable innovations are those that build upon rather than replace institutional strengths. He provided specific examples from recent client implementations, showing how platforms that incorporated institutional knowledge actually accelerated rather than slowed technological adoption because they reduced rather than increased implementation risks. The questions continued for 45 minutes, each answer revealing additional aspects of how collaborative transformation worked in practice rather than theory. The audience's enthusiasm reflected industry-wide recognition that they had discovered a sustainable alternative to the disruptive approaches that had characterized the previous decade. As the session concluded, Arthur found himself surrounded by executives, eager to discuss partnership opportunities, implementation strategies, and collaboration frameworks that could be adapted to their specific institutional requirements. Elena worked with technical teams, interested in SageChain's architecture and development methodologies, her conversations reflecting the platform's evolution, from proprietary technology to open-source foundation for industry-wide innovation. Michael engaged with younger professionals who were excited about career paths that valued both technological fluency and institutional wisdom, recognizing that their generation could serve as bridges rather than replacements for experienced leadership. Margaret consulted with board members and governance specialists who understood that successful transformation required oversight structures that promoted rather than prevented collaborative innovation. The afternoon brought breakout sessions, workshops, and networking opportunities that continued the morning's themes, while allowing participants to develop specific action plans for implementing collaborative approaches within their own organizations. Arthur spent time with CEOs who were struggling to balance innovation pressure with institutional preservation, helping them understand that these weren't competing priorities but complementary aspects of sustainable business strategy. The day concluded with a reception overlooking the Hudson River, the gathering providing informal opportunities for continued discussion and relationship building among professionals who were committed to collaborative rather than disruptive approaches to industry transformation. As evening approached, Arthur found himself standing on the reception terrace with Elena, Michael, and Margaret, the four of them reflecting on a journey that had begun with corporate humiliation and evolved into industry leadership. "This feels like a beginning rather than a conclusion," Elena observed, watching the sunset reflect off Manhattan's financial district. "We've proven that collaborative innovation works, but now we have the opportunity to help it become the standard rather than the exception." Michael nodded, his perspective shaped by witnessing his father's transformation from dismissed executive to industry visionary. "The Institute gives us a platform for education and advocacy that could fundamentally change how the financial services sector approaches leadership and innovation." Margaret's smile reflected the satisfaction of someone who had successfully navigated complex corporate and industry politics to achieve meaningful change. "More importantly, we've demonstrated that age and experience are assets rather than liabilities when properly integrated with innovation and technological advancement." Arthur looked out at the lights beginning to illuminate the financial district, understanding that the buildings below housed companies that were increasingly embracing collaborative rather than disruptive approaches to transformation. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophia Rivera, whose own transformation had become one of the partnership's most remarkable success stories. "Watching your presentation online. Thank you for proving that leadership means building others up, rather than tearing them down. Looking forward to tomorrow's implementation planning session." Sophia's evolution from insecure aggressor to collaborative leader had become a case study in how corporate cultures could change when they valued growth over politics, learning over ego, and institutional wisdom over generational prejudice. Arthur smiled as he typed back, "See you tomorrow." Excited to continue building something that proves experience and innovation make the best partners. As the reception concluded and participants prepared to return to their organizations with new frameworks for collaborative transformation, Arthur felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had chosen redemption over revenge, construction over destruction, and collaboration over competition. The revolution was complete, but the evolution was just beginning. The financial services industry had learned that the future belonged not to those who could destroy what came before, but to those who could synthesize the best of institutional wisdom, with the promise of technological innovation. Arthur Blackwell had been told he was too old to understand modern business. He had proven instead that he was exactly the right age to help business understand how to be modern while remaining wise, how to innovate while honoring knowledge, how to embrace the future while preserving the institutional foundations that made success sustainable. The transformation had succeeded beyond anyone's initial vision. Experience hadn't been defeated by innovation. It had been revealed as innovation's most valuable partner. And the industry that had nearly lost him had learned to value what he had always known, that true wisdom lies not in choosing between tradition and progress, but in understanding how they can work together to create something more powerful than either could achieve alone. The future was collaborative, and it was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,